So yeah, this is another video we're doing about the questions we asked the local council to try and get things improved and get councillors understanding issues in more depth and with more detail, with the hope that we push homelessness up the list of priorities that councillors have got. So hopefully we get more kind of better services. Really, that's the whole thing. And as I said elsewhere, local councils, they have a lot of power, and actually, members of the public have a lot of access. So we haven't actually said it yet, but they have regular committee meetings ranging from a full council, which is everyone, every department, every councillor should be there. And then you've got individual ones like a housing committee, like there is in Bedford, or an adult services committee, or a planning committee, I think there is. And I think there's finance committee, I'm sure. So you have those kind of, they might be called different things in different areas, but there will be one, and there will be a committee which looks at housing and homelessness. Even though it might not be called that, they will have a remit that covers that. And this is something I ask, which I always feel uncomfortable asking people. But for those people who come out of homelessness the other side in one piece, or nearly one piece, it's a really good, I can't really ask this really, but I guess it's good for people to not forget what they went through and think, actually, what can they do? How can they inform councillors about their experience so things get better for other people? As I say, I know some people are going to get through it and they're just, they don't want to have anything, they don't even think about it. That's understandable. But for those people who come through it and they're like, okay, do you know what? I want to fight for this. Then actually, this is the housing committees and freedom of information requests are a really good way that you can do that and get involved. And people whinge, people in general just whinge about the fact that, democracy is broken and stuff. It's not. There's a whole load of really good opportunities to actually get involved and have and for people, members of the public, to have a say in their local council. And it's quite sad, really, that in all the housing committees I've watched, I think there may be one or two questions asked by other people that I didn't know, but most people it's just our little network, and it's us that are turning up. So as I say, there's definitely lots of ways that people can get involved. So yeah, anyway, stop waffling on. So the next question we're looking at is a question I asked. Again, I didn't turn up to the meeting because I was busy. I was stuck on the M25 as it happens. But basically, you can submit these questions in advance. You don't have to turn up at all. In fact, I'd probably recommend you don't, because it's stressful. In my experience, I don't like it. But if you're nosy, you can do. You can record those meetings as well. So I think because this last housing committee wasn't recorded very well, or wasn't recorded at all, we've got an audio recording. We're probably going to turn up with our cameras next time and kind of make a proper recording of it. So this question was, I think I put this in like maybe a week or two before the actual committee, so they had plenty of time to prepare for it. So you send it to the democracy person in the council, who then sends it on to the relevant team. In this case, it was obviously housing. And this question I asked here followed on from a previous question, which was identical. So before the homelessness reduction came in I think we asked for stats in June 2017, so nearly a year before the HRA came in, we basically asked them, what's the average caseload of a housing officer? And at that point, before the HRA came in, it was between 20 and 25. The HRA came in, which is obviously way more onerous. PHPs, relief duties, all these nonsense letters they've got to get written. It's just a waste of time, or some of it's a waste of time. And at the same time with Bedford, they also basically, housing officers not only had to deal with homeless applications, they had to deal with the housing register, so they had to get people live on bidding and stuff. So a few years later, I think it was 2021, a few years later, we asked what's the average caseload now, and the average caseload at that point was between 55 and 60. So they've nearly tripled. So caseloads have nearly tripled. At the same time, the actual amount of work housing officers have to do has also probably doubled as well. So that was an issue. Council workers, it's a real, in my experience of councils, they're really kind of nasty hierarchies. Just in general, there's a culture of not challenging upstream sort of thing. I got in trouble for no good reason at all a few times with council, just by saying stuff to senior people that wasn't even controversial. But anyway, so housing officers are not very well placed to kind of raise these issues with councillors. I think they'd be kind of sat on if they tried to. So we're asking this question. It's designed really to help housing officers out, because it recognises that they've got a much more difficult job than they used to, and because of all the additional duties, and they've got a bigger caseload. So obviously what you're going to get with that is you're going to get much worse service. So a lot of the stuff we hear from the questions on YouTube and kind of elsewhere is, my housing officer never gets back to me, and it's because I'd imagine Bedford's pretty typical here. Caseloads have just exploded to a point where no sane housing officer can actually respond to everything they need to respond to. And so essentially what they're doing is they're leaving everything till the very last moment if they can. often past the last moment because they failed to actually pick up on stuff. So really, again, this is just about educate. The point of asking a question in this open forum is to educate those new councillors who have just been, put onto the housing committee of the situation housing officers are working within. Because although it seems that councillors can't tell a council what to do with their staff, obviously it has an impact. Obviously that kind of has a drip feed effect onto how council teams are resourced to actually have enough staff. So again, Shannon, you would want to actually listen to the recording and wrote all this up. So is there anything else that stood out to you in terms of the answer or the question I haven't really kind of done well there?
I think a theme throughout the sort of whole evening was there was a few times where it was sort of posited whether it was inside the remit of the committee. So that sort of, yeah, is an interesting thing to keep an eye on. I also think it's actually potentially a really good example of how the homelessness sector is just so far behind every other sector. You look at the education sector, there's rules and policies around class sizes. Now, it's not quite a caseload, but it is a caseload because it's to do with how much marking you have to do, how much homework you set, all of the sort of the behaviours you manage. It's very parallel to sort of the casework that goes on with housing options officers. And I worry for the welfare of housing options officers, but more importantly, if you're in a bad mood, you take it out on others. Um, I'm not necessarily saying that's always done on purpose. If it's going to lead to poor decisions at the sake of the client, I just don't see how it's worth it. And I understand that there's work being done around recruitment. And I think that's the other interesting point is actually why is retention bad and why is recruitment not going well? And I don't know if that's because of the lack of pay within the job or whether it's because of pressures in the job and actually people don't want to be making bad decisions, so they're finding work in other sectors. I'm not sure the reasons as to why the recruitment process, isn't going well, but it would be very interesting to work out if there's a way we can get that information.
So it's kind of chicken and egg, isn't it? If why would you go and apply for a job where you can have a caseload of 55 people who are have all this additional stuff to do? So I think this is where I think my response to this would be, and obviously I don't know what the council's finances are like, but when you look at Bedford Borough and our neighbours, Central Beds, they took two different kind of routes with social work. So probably like 5 years ago, something like that, I've got a good friend who's a social worker, and first of all, Central Beds kind of had this like I can't remember what they called it, but it was like a kind of it was all about training up newly qualified social workers. It was about taking them under their wing, investing in them, kind of improving things for them. Whereas Bedford, yeah, and so I think there was a big pay rise as well for Central Beds. Whereas Bedford were quite slow with that, if I'm understanding correctly. And at one point they did all get like an 8 grand pay rise, but it was kind of like too late. Then they hadn't invested in those new starters, and they hadn't invested in, as I say, yeah, people who are newly qualified who are like, this is these few years are going to, going to set up how you then do for the rest of your career. So yeah, I think ultimately my response to this would be is, Bedford needs to really kind of invest in the long term. And they have done it before. So there were times when they kind of took on some good people, potentially new to the sector. So they weren't kind of, set in their ways and hardened and, kind of used to gatekeeping and that sort of stuff. And there are some really good housing officers still at Bedford who kind of came in during that period. So, but again, this is where council, I know county, what Lee Fanko is saying, the head of service is saying is that councillors can't really have a direct say on staffing, but they kind of can. I'm sure that they set budgets, they do that kind of stuff. They can obviously influence the council and how it treats the staff and how it invests in people. So although it costs more money in the short term, like the long term consequences are clearly that they're going to struggle to meet their duty. So yeah, I think that's all I've got to say on this one. In one sense, our next action for this is revisit in a year's time, see what's what.